if you've heard one word a little bit this morning, it's negotiation. And as I've been educated more and more, still got a ways to go, negotiation isn't narrow to pediatricians and payers. We negotiate all the time. And everything we do is a negotiation. And we actually have a presenter who is knowledgeable and expert in this area in terms of sharing some perspective and strategies. So I'm thrilled to introduce Stephanie Hanna, who's going to chat with us between now and lunchtime about everyday negotiations. Off here.
All right, test.
And then this should, green button should move the slides.
And this is back. I need back.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
You back?
No, I didn't push it, just testing. Okay, perfect.
You good?
Yes,
Take it away.
awesome. Great, good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Stephanie Hanna. I am a lawyer by trade, and I have a business called The Other 85. And the idea is that 15% of our job success comes from the hard technical skills, what we went to school for. And the other 85, the networking, the relationship building, the tricky conversations, the everyday negotiations, is what makes or breaks our success. So I'm going to spend the next 30 or so minutes with you talking about the other 85, about everyday negotiations, everyday tricky conversations, and try and give you some practical tips that you can take from here and implement right away. We're going to try and make some of these tricky conversations a little easier. How many of us, when we think of a difficult conversation, this happens inside of our brains? If I have to discipline someone or terminate someone or tell them they're not showing up on time or they're not talking to patients or families appropriately or any of those things, who feels this? Who would say, if I could just go and talk to my patients, not even their families, talk to my patients and care for them and go home and not have to deal with any of the other stuff? That's what I really want to do, right? So for many of us in any profession, this is the worst part. We didn't go to school for this. I didn't know this was part of the gig. I want to just do the stuff I'm passionate about. So we're going to spend some time today talking about everyday negotiations, informal exchanges, where we are just trying to exchange information, talk about opinions, talk about people's needs, and they typically involve difficult or tricky conversations. Here's a really important thing to remember. And, I have to tell my lawyer clients this all the time. It's not about getting the facts right. It doesn't really matter if you're right or wrong. There's so much more to it than being right or wrong. Because if it was just right or wrong, that's easy. We can pull facts. But it's when we start mixing in emotions and people's feelings and wants and needs that it just starts getting more complicated. We're going to go through top 10 things to keep in mind. If you have questions or you want me to workshop something or give you some sample language on something in particular, just raise your hand. They'll run a mic to you and we can kind of do some live workshopping as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about this concept called know, like, and trust. If you don't take away anything else from this 30 minutes, take away this. People have to know you, like you, and trust you to want to work with you. And it's interesting. I give this talk a lot to lawyers, and I always tell them, there's a lot of people that can review a contract. There's a lot of people that can litigate my case for me. There's a lot of people that can represent me in a labor negotiation or in a contract dispute or come to court for me and get me comparably the same outcome, right? But who do I want to give my money to? Who do I want to spend my time with? It's someone that I know, like, and trust. And as I was listening to the earlier presentation, I'm gathering that's true in this profession. Also, when I hear that 90% of the people that you see are coming in for routine, healthy sorts of experiences, vaccines and well visits and those sorts of things. So I'm imagining, and as a parent, I think this, I imagine any one of you could tell me if my kid has an ear infection or not, right? And any one of you could essentially get me the medicine that I need to give them. But I only want to go to you if I know you, I like you, and I trust you. And the same thing applies to your staff. And that's the difference maker. So we're going to spend some time really talking about how do we establish this know, like, and trust. And many of the other tips that we're going to cover are going to feed right into this. So I want to make sure I'm on time because I also know I am the last thing between you and lunch. So don't worry. I will keep you on time. Okay, think of someone that you admire. In the profession, out of the profession, it doesn't matter. Someone that you actually know that you admire. And just shout out one or two characteristics that you admire about them. Good listener, honesty, patience, loyal, approachable, nice, knowledgeable, awesome. Okay, so I've asked thousands of people this question over the last 7 years, and all the words are like that, right? None of the words are ever, they're the smartest person in the room always, they always know the answer, they always get it right, they're never wrong, they graduated top of their class, right? That's not why we admire people. So when we're able to build this know, like, and trust, people are going to say those words that you just shared about you and about your staff and about your practice, and that's why they're going to want to continue to visit you. The other good thing about know, like, and trust, it creates super fans. Think about someone that you know, like, and trust. If they drop the ball, if they're 5 minutes late for lunch, 10 minutes late for lunch, if they forget to do something, you're their super fan. They can kind of get away with it because you know them, you like them, and you trust them. They have built that foundation. Same thing goes for you. If I know you, like you, and trust you, and you do something, you're a little late for my appointment, you do something else that I don't love, much easier for me to forgive you and move on. If I don't have that know, like, and trust, I am keeping a score sheet of all the things you did wrong and all the reasons I need to go find someone else. Let's talk a little bit about your energy and the role that that plays. I'm going to share a story with you, a study. There was a group of first-time skydivers, and they put sweat pads on them, and they had them run on a treadmill. They took those sweat pads off, they put new sweat pads on them, and they had them jump out of the airplane. They had another group of people smell all of those sweat pads, and they were monitoring their brains. When they smelled the sweat pads of the people running on the treadmill, nothing happened. When they smelled the sweat pads of the people as they were jumping out of the plane, their own fear and anxiety receptors skyrocketed. They could smell the fear. That's a proven thing that has been proven time and time again. Your energy bounces off of you, and other people interpret it and pick it up, and it impacts their psyche, whether or not you intend for it to happen, whether or not they intend for it to happen. This is why when you walk into a room and the energy is high, you feel good. You walk into a room and the energy is low, your energy goes down. Share another example with you. There was a study, they had an artificial intelligence robot, and they programmed him, he was in a box, and they programmed it to go 50% of the time left turns, 50% of the time right turns. So they set it for 2 minutes, and you could see half the time he was turning left, half the time he was turning right. They put a group of baby chicks in a box right next to where this robot was. And they, same thing, 50% right, 50% left is how he was coded. They let him go. 100% of the time he turns right towards where the chicks are. He could feel their good energy, and it overrode all the AI coding. And the chicks wanted to be by whatever they saw, so the chicks were at this edge of their box, and the AI robot was turning. Good energy attracts good energy, right? So the more of that you're able to cultivate within yourself and within your team, people are attracted to that. That helps build the know, like, and trust. And here's the other thing. A big piece of this is mastering your own emotional regulation. That goes a very long way into making sure that you're showing up with the right energy. So, don't think that you just show up with fairy dust and rainbows and we're happy all the time. It's not that. We've got to get a little bit deeper, which is a conversation that, is not someone like me that you want to have with, but you need to make sure that your own ability to master your emotional regulation is under control, because then you can show up with the energy that you need, and then you can help build that know, like, and trust. Disarming phrases. How many of you, when you have to talk to a staff member or a colleague or someone and it's not great, you want to start it with we have to talk, right? How many of you have ever been on the receiving end of a we have to talk, right? Whether it's home or work or wherever, right? That does not feel good, right? Even if it's we have to talk, what do you want for lunch, right? That's not how our brains work. Our brains hear that phrase and they don't like it. So when you're preparing to have a tricky conversation with someone, you have to make disarming phrases a part of your normal vocabulary. I've given you some examples and a really easy framework that you can implement. Hey, do you have a minute? Imagine, doesn't that sound so much different than we need to talk? Hey, do you have a minute? The same content can follow, but it makes such a big difference the way that you're opening it. I've noticed, right? If we could take you out of tricky conversations, the word you, and just replace them with things with I, they would feel so much better. You'd get much better results, I promise you. I've noticed that when I'm out here looking for you, I don't see you. Other than, why are you late? And now I know some of you are thinking look, I don't have time to sugarcoat this. I got things to do. I can't be concerned with your feelings all day long. We've got 19 people right in the back that we're trying to tend to. And I hear you, but I'm also trying to explain to you how humanity works. And I'm trying to explain to you the way that people respond the best and the way that you can set yourself up for the most success and the reality of the stresses that all of us are facing. And so as leaders and as managers, whether we signed up for it or not, that's what we are, right? We have to create an environment that makes people feel okay to have a conversation, makes people feel like they want to be there, feel like they're being heard, and feel like they're not being talked down to. So this framework is good. Hey, do you have a minute? I've noticed, and my personal favorite, what are your thoughts? I use that one at home all the time. I use that with my kids, my husband. I say my idea, and then I just say, what are your thoughts? It's just like taking the air out of the, in such a good way. It just deflates everything. What do you think? Another really important one, always and never, right? Take those out of the vocabulary. Sometimes is your friend. Even if a person is doing something more than sometimes, the word sometimes is just so much nicer to hear, right? You're always late. Hey, I've noticed that sometimes it's closer to 9 than 8:30 when you're walking in. Is there something I can do to help, right? Is there something that's happening? Has something changed? What are your thoughts, right? I need you to be here closer to 8:30 every day. What are your thoughts? And here's the thing, people are probably not used to being talked to like that. You'd be surprised. I think you'll get a lot more of a conversation and you'll learn more about the people on your team. There might be something going on that is a very easy fix. But sometimes when we come at people a little too aggressive, they don't want to share that. And then we can't problem solve with them. Compassionate curiosity. This is something that I think you can really implement in most dealings of everyday conversations. A little bit of compassion, a little bit of curiosity. Focus on the problem, not the person, right? So it's never, you did this, you do that. Why do you always? Why don't you ever? Right? It's, hey, I've noticed A, B, and C is happening. What do you think is a solution? What are some ideas that you have? Can you help me understand why this would be important to you? Can you help me brainstorm some other solutions? And in this one, you always want to, through all these conversations also, really pay attention to your tone. You know that old saying that it's not what you said, it's how you said it, right? That's particularly true in these situations as well. That's what people remember. They typically don't remember the specific language that you used, but they remember how you said it and how it made them feel. This one, and we're all busy people, I get it. Listening. I think sometimes, even if we are well-intentioned, even if we want to agree with something that someone is saying, we're interrupting. There's nothing that can kill the energy or kill someone's willingness to share with you more than you interrupting something that they're saying, not letting them finish. And quite frankly, about half the time, all the person wants is to be heard. All they want is just to be able to get the full story out, right? Even if you are agreeing with them, you're like, oh, let me cut you off right there. I totally agree. I'm following you. You're basically doing as much damage as if you are interrupting with bad intentions. It doesn't really matter. That's not how our brains work. We hear an interruption and we equate it with bad. So really paying attention to how we can listen, stopping ourselves. This is a tricky one. If this is something you want to work on and you know it's a problem for you, pick someone in your life that you trust and say, hey, you need to call me out. When I interrupt you or someone else, like, you need to call me out so that my brain can break that habit. This is one of my favorites. It's called an and stance. In a tricky conversation, think of a way that you can take out the word but from your vocabulary and replace it with the word and. This is the number one way for you to sound less defensive. So I'll give you an example. I've noticed you're interrupting our team a lot, but it's really causing folks to not feel heard. Hey, do you have a minute? I've noticed that some people feel that they're being interrupted by you when they're speaking. And I know what you have to say is really important too. And I'm hopeful that we can come up with a solution so that everyone feels heard. That's very different. If you're on the receiving ends of those conversations, which one are you more likely to want to participate in? Anytime you want to use the word but, take it out, use the word and. I'm going to pause here for a second. Any questions so far? Any examples? Anything you don't love? Anything you want to know more about? All right, that's okay. I just needed also some time to get some water. So no problem. We're going to move on. Early and often, creating a culture of conversations. How many of you have, like, you're thinking of a conversation right now that you know you've needed to have for the last 3 months and you still haven't had it? Right? They wouldn't be such a big deal if we did it early and we did it often. And we created a community, a culture of conversation, a culture of compassionate curiosity. Pulse checks. We don't even have to call them difficult conversations. We don't have to call them everyday negotiations. We can come up with words that sound better. Pulse checks, check-ins. Maybe pulse checks is not good for this audience. And I've never really, like, because I'm thinking about it on the fly, I have not really presented this to physicians before, but check-ins, touch points, touch bases, right? Let's have these. Let's have morning meetings once a week, whatever it is, creating a culture of these everyday conversations so that they aren't so daunting, so that the can we talk doesn't seem like such a big deal. Because sure, we can talk. We talk every week. We talk every day. And this also is a really easy way to help keep small problems small and make sure that they don't turn into big problems. A lot of times I will get hired to help law firms with exit interviews, right? Why are we not retaining staff? And I will talk to folks and they will talk of stories from 16 months ago. And they will say, well, no one ever told me. No one ever talked to me about this. No one ever came to me. And then I will go talk to leadership and they will say, what? Like, I didn't know about that. What are you talking about? Like, that was never brought to our attention, right? There's just such a disconnect. That didn't come up in their review. Well, how often are we doing reviews? Well, once a year. Right. Okay, so the one time you talk to them, it didn't come up. But meanwhile, this person has been feeling this way for 16 months, right? And a lot of times it's good talent. Sometimes it's not good talent. They don't care. Everyone's happy to part ways. But when they bring me in, it's because they want to know, why are we, this person is billing 2,000 hours a year for us and they're doing a great job. Why are they leaving? Why are they so unhappy? We pay them so much money, right? There is definitely a point where another X amount of dollars is not going to make up for a bad culture, or a place where I don't feel heard, where I don't feel valued, where I don't feel I can come to you with my problems, and they are met with solutions. So the more often we can do this, the better. So for those of you that raised your hand that you've been have this conversation that you want to have, hopefully you're getting some language that you can implement and maybe a little bit of courage to have that conversation very soon. I teach a negotiations class at Ohio State, and one of the things that we talk a lot about is your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So we go into a negotiation and we want this outcome right here. And oftentimes our brains are wired that if we don't get this outcome, it's a failure, it's a loss, go home. This did not work. And so I spend a lot of time trying to get students to don't just go in there with what you want, but I need you to have like 3 BATNAs. I need a BATNA 1, a BATNA 2, and a BATNA 3, right? So, okay, we don't get this, but maybe we can do this, or this, or this. So when you are having these tricky conversations, we're going to talk a little bit about practicing, but when you're practicing and when you're preparing, it's really important not just to think about like, well, now I need you to be on time, or I need you to be nicer to patients, or I need you to X. And if you don't do that, you know, the conversation's over. If you're not prepared to go that route, that's certainly a route. That's not a bad route in all situations. But if it's like a person you really want to keep, or a person you know, who has been performing well, but something is happening, and you want to have a conversation around that, or you're trying to negotiate in some other way, and it's not very contentious, right? You don't have to just walk away if you don't get the very exact thing that you want. You've got to have a plan A, plan B, and plan C. Like, if I don't get this, what's the best alternative? And then what's the next best alternative? And always approaching these conversations with a collaborative mindset, working together, not confrontational. A lot of these things, I heard a little bit of the earlier presentation about conversations with insurance reps, and a lot of these techniques can help in some of those situations and conversations as well, because you're bringing a collaborative approach to it, and people, human nature, want to work with people who appear to also want to work with them, instead of who are confronting them with, why don't you do A, B, and C, and this is what's wrong, and here's how I need you to fix it. Next one is practice. And how many of you have spent a lot of time practicing the medicine part of your job? Right? When you're in school, all they're teaching you is the medicine part of your job. And then you're here in the real world, and we have to talk to people all the time and have tricky conversations. How many of you have ever recorded yourself having a difficult conversation, like in the mirror, or practicing it before you have had it? Good, that's awesome. Not the same amount of hands, but if there's one way that you want to improve in this space, I've given you tips. I could coach you one-on-one. I can do all the things, but this is the only thing I can tell individual clients and when I'm doing presentations. This stuff is all good, but it doesn't really matter if you aren't going to actually practice it and implement it. And sometimes the best way to implement it is not live for that actual tricky conversation. It's to do it ahead of time, plan it out, write some bullet points. You don't have to have this memorized. In fact, it's probably a lot more comforting to say, hey, do you have a minute? I've noticed, I've made some notes, some ideas for some solutions. Here are some things that I think might help. Do you have anything that we could add to this list? Get comfortable having these conversations. Because remember what we said about energy? If you're nervous and you haven't practiced and you're coming in with this nervous energy, that is exactly what that other person is picking up. And now the whole energy of the room has just gone up in not a good way. And everybody's feeling nervous. And it's not very conducive for having the type of conversation that you're interested in having. The last thing we'll talk about here is following up. How many of you, when you do have the conversation, you're like, okay, good, that's done. Everybody, let's just go back to how it was and pretend this never happened? Yes, that is common. So don't blame the bad conversation, right? Blame this idea that you have to follow up. This cannot be a one and done thing. Nothing has ever been solved in a conversation, right? That is able to be solved for the long term. That's able to keep the relationships and keep the energy in the place that you want them, right? So getting into this habit of, hey, let's give this some thought and revisit this next week. Or, hey, I'm going to put this date on our calendar to talk next week, and then I'm going to put a follow-up automatically 4 weeks later, right? There should never be, especially if you're someone that uses calendar invites internally, there should never be a one and done calendar invite when you are trying to talk to a teammate, especially about corrective action or changing behavior or trying to come up with different solutions. There should always be when we're having the talk and then when we're having the follow-up. And heck, if you really want to knock it out of the park, set up a quarterly recurring conversation. It doesn't have to be because something bad has happened or there's something I have to discuss. It could just be a quarterly check-in, which really goes a long way to helping create this culture of conversation, this culture of check-ins. All right, so those are, I've taken hours and hours of presentations and tried to give you the down and dirty, the top 10 best things without getting into a whole lot of detail. I think there's a lot of things that you can pick up and implement as soon as you leave here. Does anyone have any questions on anything or want me to dig in any deeper on anything?
I'm Teresa. I'm with Peds Associates. Thank you. I'm envisioning having some pleasant conversations with people to talk about things that are problematic, but I want to make sure the person that I'm talking to understands that it is problematic and not just a friendly conversation. Do you have any magic words for making it clear that there's a problem that needs correcting and that there may be a consequence to not correcting without being too harsh, I guess?
Yes, I love it. You guys are all nodding your heads. Like you think that if you talk this way, people are going to walk all over you. Like you have to, here's the consequence. How many of you have tried to parent that way? I only say this as someone who went into parenting thinking that I was going to be like this. And now I'm like, oh, okay, maybe we got to kind of go with the flow a little more. No, so here's the thing. They're going to know. They're going to know. And you can, with the right energy, I can say, hey, here's what I've been noticing. It's problematic because it's impacting the rest of our team. So help me come up with some solutions so that we can make sure this doesn't happen in the future. That's much different than this is bothering everybody. You need to stop. And if you don't, in the next 3 times, I'm taking X, Y, and Z corrective action. I think I communicated roughly the same things. Here are the things that are happening. Here's why they're a problem. Here are some solutions. Let's revisit this in 3 weeks and see if we've been able to correct the problem. If not, we may have to have an additional conversation, right? Or we may have to explore some additional options. So I think you can deliver the same message using some of the phrasing and using some of this terminology in a way that doesn't, here is the behavior, and here is what went wrong, and here are what the expectation, and here are the consequences, right? That's a way to do it. I just find that people are not receptive to that. They don't react in the way that you want. In fact, they kind of double down. And then it gets to the place where you're like, okay, well, now I got to fire you. Okay, well, then I got to find someone new, and then I got to train them, and then I got to spend time, and I got to do all this stuff. And it's like, if you would have just softened your approach, you probably could have saved them, because they probably want to stay there, but they probably don't love maybe being talked to in a way that doesn't make them feel supported. And I think that's a great question.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Cato, CMPA. I'm a pediatrician. Thank you for your talk. It kind of feeds off the last question. How do you address kind of, let's say, different generational kind of ways of communication, and what's taken like not taken seriously, but just even just the method of communication, whether that's in person, on text, emails is a big problem with even setting up a meeting, perhaps, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think having a kind of level setting conversation can be really helpful, and saying, hey, what are your preferred ways of communication? Here are the ways that this office prefers to communicate, right? Especially if you're a person that's able to set the tone or set the guidelines. Might there be a way that we can find a way to meet in the middle? Or if we're requesting a meeting, right, we are going to make the request, like, I'm putting something on your calendar because I know that there's an open time here. That's like an accepted way to do things in our office. If not, then I'm going to come to you in person. I'm going to say, give me a time that you can talk, and we're going to put that, down on both of our calendars. So I think just having that conversation, some people are going to like to text, and some people are going to be on like the instant message in the office, and some people aren't. And so I think just having some clarity around what's accepted and what works and what doesn't work can be helpful in level setting so that everyone knows the expectation.
I'm Anjali Modi with Pizza of Arlington. Thank you so much. Great talk. One question I had was, when you are already expecting either a patient or a colleague, or office, colleague, just, they're already in a situation where they're stressed or they're coming in with a concern, and you know that you're going into a conversation that's going to be stressful. How do you de-escalate, other than your energy level, and you go a little bit prepared? How do you de-escalate so you're not like in a kind of shouting match with them, or like,
Yeah.
or even on a phone conversation, the parents coming at you and they're already angry about something. So
Yes. So I think the most important thing throughout all of it is to maintain your ability to be calm, right? So that's kind of the foundational. But I think beyond that, there's language where if it's getting to a place where you're like, this might be a good place to end this, you can say, hey, I want to continue this conversation. I just don't know how productive it is right in this moment. I think it would be better if we revisit this tomorrow at X time, right? So we're trying to set up a different time. If it's something that seems salvageable in the conversation, then let them go. Let them go. It seems like forever, and you have 16 other people waiting for you, and like, I don't got time for this. I hear you. 5 minutes of letting someone vent it all out, get it all out. Go ahead. If you need to be typing notes and doing something else on the side, that's okay too. The act of getting it all out is very beneficial to this conversation, and to not feel like, but wait, no, like I didn't finish, right? Because like, you're always interrupting me. So letting them completely vent. Lots of phrases. I hear you. I understand. I know that's frustrating. Let me try to. I wonder if it might help if we, right? A lot of like the language, it's not I, you, me, right? It's we, our, how can we? What do you think? So it's just a lot of this kind of like, instead of sharp corners, like how do we round the corners of the language that we're using? And a lot of times that in and of itself can bring people down and feeling heard. And if it doesn't, scheduling another follow-up time can be helpful. And then sometimes if you've done one or two of those and you're like, okay, I need another option, you can take the lead in this conversation. Say, hey, I allowed you to have most of the time of our last conversation to talk. So I want the time now to address some of the points, and then I will turn it back over to you. So that way you can at least make sure to kind of get out some of the information you're trying to convey, and then see, maybe that will help, maybe it won't. And then same cycle, rinse and repeat.
I'm Zakia with Advanced Pediatrics. Quick question for patient concerns. Is it better to thank them for their concern and then address and listen to what they have to say, or not?
When you say or not, what does that mean? Like,
This is what we're going to do, and that's it.
so the first one of those two. Yes, I mean, hey, thanks for raising that. I appreciate this. We are on the same team, right? It's us against the problem. It's not me against you. It's us and your kid against this problem. We are on the same team. Thank you for raising this concern. I've given it some thought. Here are some ideas. Yes, that's going to always be the way to go versus like just diving in. All right, we might be good. Thank you guys for having me.